My schoolmate visited me, and this is Edwin Thatcher, the guy that he'd grown up with, and I fully acquainted him with my problems, step 5, and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt, toward whom I had felt resentment, and that's the other half of step 4 here. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals. That would be like step 8. Admitting my wrong, step 9. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems, as he would have me. Step 10, never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. I think I had somebody ask me last week where he says common sense would thus become uncommon sense. What does that mean? I have to be honest with you, I haven't given that a whole lot of thought, other than remember the idea that the whole basic idea of recovery is about that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our problem, and that selflessness and self-sacrifice for others is the spiritual solution. So they're literally, I always call them two opposite ends of the spectrum, like right and wrong, good and evil, selfishness and selflessness. That's the Alcoholics Anonymous program of recovery. And therefore, when he says common sense would thus become uncommon sense, he's sort of inverting the two. He's saying that there's an explanation out there somewhere about what do they call that, the spiritual experience, not the awakening thing. That's what's written on the board there, but that's the way he actually wrote it, was spiritual experience. And, I've also had people ask me what's the difference, and I said, I don't know. I don't think it's the same damn thing, actually, just two different ways of saying it. Spiritual experience, and they say where one person had a certain set of guides and ideals in which they lived their life by, was all of a sudden they've turned 180 degrees and were going in completely the opposite direction, and they had swapped one set that didn't work for one set that did. Therefore, that common sense would thus become uncommon sense, is almost like he's gone in the other direction, from one direction and turned around and went in a completely other direction. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, and this is like step 11, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. There's a lot of... I see a lot of people do the prayer and meditation thing as if it's, and I did too. I thought it was like almost a connection between the real world in which we live in every day and the spiritual world, where everybody who's dead goes, or wherever God is, or wherever all the other half of the existence, or whatever you might want to call it. That's what I always thought that was when they said, you're going to pray and meditate, somehow get in touch with the other spirit world or something. And my experience with it is that it's all right here, and how you get in touch with it. And it's a really good paragraph out in A Vision for You that says that though these men knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive becomes secondary. If you want to see it, we'll go out there real quick. And it's one of the most profound things that I know of in this book, because it really does explain in a real world way what it is that I feel when I live the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's... I'll get you the page here. Page 159. Page 159, right in the middle of the page there. And once again, this is the same story that's repeated over and over again. Bill Wilson is on the verge of a drink. It's it. His sobriety is over. He's got 6 months of sobriety. It's gone. He is going to drink that night. And what does he do? He finds another alcoholic to help with. And this says, all this time, this is like the second paragraph down, 2.5 paragraphs, what do you want to call it? All this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident, in which Bill almost drank, remained in that town, Akron, Ohio. He was there for 3 months. So that gives Bill Wilson 9 months of sobriety there. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, Dr. Bob, the lawyer, which is Bill Dobson, and the devil may care chap, that AA number 4 guy. These men had found something brand new in life. And this is the part I was getting to, is this next 3 or 4 lines right here. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary, It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. And what that means to me is my conscious contact with God is based on what I do for God, what I do in my daily life. When I do something that I perceive as being done for the God of my understanding, it makes me feel closer to God. It makes me feel it is transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. And it's sort of like in going back to the promises of the ninth step, where he says that we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And what he's essentially saying there is that I'm gonna have this intuitive, I'm gonna get this gut feeling, as so to speak, on how to react to things that happen to me. And what I'm doing is I'm teaching my subconscious self how to react to these things in the future. Just like when we teach ourselves when we're angry, we must react with forgiveness, and we're going to practice that principle in all our affairs in order to teach our subconscious selves how to forgive when we're angry, and we're going to get better and better and better at it over years, at getting to the anger before it becomes a festering wound in our head and becomes a fist fight and we end up screaming at somebody or something. We're going to, over a period of time, and that's exactly what's happening when I'm helping other alcoholics. I'm going to teach this is faith in God, like it says here. The reference that we see, faith without works is dead, refers to step 12. If your faith without works is dead and you're not helping others through step 12, where is your faith in God? It's dead. And that, too, is what we're talking about, is how close I feel to the God of this world. And it's, I see people turning the lights out, and they light candles, and they play whale songs. That happened over at the the 101 Club one night. They were actually playing whale songs. And I was sitting there, I was starting to laugh, and I started to giggle at first, and I started to laugh, and I had to get up and leave because I was like disrupting their meeting. But I mean, to me, it seems like it's a simple idea. Back to how close I feel to God is in direct proportion to what I do for God. And what do we do for God? We help bring others to God through the 12 steps and the spiritual solutions of forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. Those are the 3 spiritual solutions that we have. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator. You see what he's saying there? He's saying that when I live forgiveness to get rid of to deal with my anger, when I live making amends to deal with my guilt for what I do to other people, and when I live faith in God of helping others through the 12 steps, this is how I'm going to get close to God. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. All of my problems. There's only 3 spiritual solutions that we have to worry about: forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. Because remember out in the 4th step where he says, from this stem all other forms of spiritual disease. And when we straighten out spiritually, we straighten out mentally and physically. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Now look what he says here. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. That's one of my favorite quotes in this whole book. I must turn in all things. And that means my heartbeat, my breathing, and all the little things that are happening in my life. I like to think that I'm in charge, but the truth of the matter is God is in charge of all things. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great, clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. That's Bill Wilson's description of his spiritual experience, the spiritual awakening or whatever. But spiritual experience is actually written like 5 times in the book, and spiritual awakening was written once, and it was changed from spiritual experience the way that Bill originally wrote it. But I'll I'm going to find it one of these days. 90% of all alcoholics have the gradual, educated variety of spiritual experience, and 10% have Bill Wilson's sudden and profound. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, Dr. Silkworth, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you. I don't understand. But you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. You know that while he was still in the hospital here, that Ebby Thatcher, his schoolyard friend, Edwin, had brought him that book that was given to Edwin Thatcher by, and there's a letter that Bill wrote, and I believe it's this one up here, The Language of the Heart, that Bill wrote to Dr. Carl Jung, what he calls one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, actually, because of that book. And it helped Bill Wilson understand the nature of the spiritual experience that he had had. It was Varieties of Religious Experience by William James, and it was given to him by Ebby while he was in the hospital bed here. Let's see. Finally, he shook his head, saying something had happened. Let me see what it was. The good doctor now sees many men who've had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, so you see, he's still in the hospital now, and he's done step 11. He's gone up to step 11, and he's fixing to get the idea of step 12 in his head while he's still in the hospital bed. Wait a minute. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They, in turn, might work with others. I don't know where that came from, because I got to tell you, if I was laying in that hospital bed, that never would have come to me. My friend had emphasized, because I believe there's some stuff that's left out here, like probably Ebby had told him about the Oxford groups a lot more than what he's hinting on to here, that the Oxford groups had saved him by sending him out to help others. And that was what Ebby was doing there. He actually showed up there because Ebby was thinking to himself, they're telling me to find somebody to help. I know, Bill Wilson. He's one of my old drinking buddies from school. I'm going to go over to his house. That's how Ebby ended up over there. They sent him over there. This is Bill's step 12 here. This is one of my favorite things to read here, too. And then I'll open up the meeting a few more minutes here. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Of course, we see that in step 12, practice these principles in all our affairs. And one of the things that I almost can't stand that word anymore, because people are out there going brotherly love and hope and open-mindedness, and those things are great, but that is not the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. When he says demonstrating these principles in all my affairs, he's talking about doing the inventory in all your affairs, finding when you are angry and applying forgiveness to it. He's talking about finding when you're afraid in all of the affairs of your life. Find out where you're afraid and apply faith to that. And whenever you've harmed other people in anything that you do, you find out what you've done to hurt them and you make amends. And those are the principles that they're talking about, practicing in all your affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me, because this is the whole core of this, is that it's rooted in fear, and our combat, how we combat fear, is through faith in God. And remember, once again, that faith in God is essentially working with other alcoholics. That is what faith in God is, and it's referred to many times in here. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life, so how we perfect and enlarge our spiritual life is through work and self-sacrifice for others. And how that works is, it's what I think that God wants me to do, and it makes me feel. When we went out there to A Vision for You, and he said, it's transcended by the happiness they find in giving themselves for others. So essentially, it as my sponsor would put it, it really is this simple. He says, when you do good, you're going to feel good. And when you do bad, you're going to feel bad. And by doing things for others and not expecting anything in return, primarily, this is one of the most profound things that I've experienced in my life, is that when I teach other people about the God of this world, and it is not me, I am nothing without God. Remember what he said? Well, he says, there I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. This is what I was getting to. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. Of myself I was nothing. So that's what that does. That reaffirms that I am not the God of this world, and that without the God of this world I am nothing. And a continued source of this is to go around teaching other people this over and over and over. And remember, we don't teach religion. What we teach is this 12 steps to whatever God or higher power it is that you feel is running this place, to get in touch with whatever's running this place. And what that does for me is it gives me a sense of ego deflation. It helps me to remember that what one of the doctors, Dr. Harry Tiebout, had said was he had noticed that the alcoholics had this incredible ego that had this remarkable ability to restore its former glory. That these alcoholics come into their hospital smashed, broken people. They don't want to go on, and 2 weeks later they're on top of their game again. They're king of the world, and they're God of this world again. And what the alcoholic does is he stays on top of that. And we that's why one of the things they say is that they favor hospitalization, and they also favor getting to the alcoholic right in the hospital, right out of the gate, and getting them before they start getting their ego coming back up. Because your ego gets smashed, and then it starts through the natural healing process. The ego must restore itself, and we try to keep that ego from restoring its former glory. And that is how that happens for us. Is we teach others about the God of this world. It reminds us that we're not it. For others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. So here's my wife and I abandoned ourselves. Him and his wife both set out. Remember out there in the chapter to wives, one of the things that somebody taught me was all those chapters out there, the chapter to wives, the family afterward, to employers. I used to always look at those chapters and go, what the hell do I want to read that for? It's the chapter to employers. I don't employ anyone. It's a chapter to wives. I'm not a wife. And what those chapters are saying is just like the Oxford group said, that the 12 steps are for everyone, including the wives. And here he is saying that him and his wife both set out to help other alcoholics. She's right there with him. And that's how she ended up starting that Al-Anon thing. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. That's very profound right there, huh? So here's Bill Wilson with some time under his belt here, and he was plagued. Well, this is within his first 6 months, I would guess, before he met Dr. Bob. He was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment, but he was still on this path of getting closer to God, even though one of the things out in the 11th step says, suppose we fall short of this. Suppose we fall short of this ideal. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? And he says, no, as long as our motives are right, that if you do end up getting into a fist fight with somebody, it doesn't mean you're going to get drunk tonight. What it means is you need to redouble your efforts at learning how to get rid of this anger before it gets to us. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. So that's the basic teaching. We're going to open up the floor. We're going to stop right there with work with another alcoholic would save the day. When all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. That is the basic message. You know, whenever I go to an AA meeting, too, I never go, gee, I wonder what I'm going to say today. Well, I'm going to tell everybody about my problems. Am I going to tell them about my life? I had a flat tire today. Something's going wrong here. Something's going wrong there. Whatever it might be. I had an argument with the boss or whatever. No. I'm going to tell them that work with another alcoholic will save the day. It's a message I always take to all AA meetings. I always say, look, one of the ideas about getting out of self is just that idea itself. That getting out of self really means get out of self, not sitting around talking about it, not thinking about it, but go out and do it. And so, too, does the idea that going to a meeting and telling everybody my problems just gets deeper and deeper into my problems. They're stewing further and further into my head. Or I go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and talk about God, spirituality, the solutions, the big book, what the details of the steps. That was one of the things that really attracted me to some of the people that I was following around, going, hey, what can I learn from this person? What can I learn from that one? Was people started giving me details about the steps, and that was something I hadn't experienced before. I had heard a lot of vague descriptions and references to, I heard people, let me give you an example. I heard people make reference to helping others in the same voice that they would say, push in chairs and make the coffee. Pushing in chairs and making a coffee ain't going to keep you sober. Helping others, helping other alcoholics, and helping them through the 12 steps and implementing those 12 steps into your daily life, that's going to keep you sober. And here they're going, you can empty the ashtrays, I don't know, make some coffee, help others, whatever you want to do, But no, it's not that. You help others or fall by the wayside and be one of those people that go, did you hear about so-and-so? Yeah, he drank. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Now, you have to ask yourself a question, and I know I did. I said, why does working with another alcoholic save the day? What's to that? How exactly does that work? Is that too difficult a question, or is it like spiritual calculus, as they say? And it's beyond my ability to comprehend the idea that this sometimes nearly drove me back to drink, but I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. And, we went out to that chapter in the end out there, A Vision for You, where he says that though these men knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, that motive becomes secondary, and it is transcended by the happiness they find in giving themselves for others. And the way I understand it is this, the unconditional love deal is that you do something for someone else and do not place any conditions on it. And from that, you will feel better about who you are on the end. They say it's an inside job. You got to get to the inside. And many times I hear people make reference to, I do this for these people and I do that for those people, and then they follow it up with, but no one ever appreciates me and they don't ever give me the credit due or something. And that's the breaking point for doing something for somebody else. When you're expecting something in return from them for what you've done, it cancels it out as something that's a selfless act. But here in Alcoholics Anonymous, we do things, and I see a lot of that too in sponsors and sponsees where you almost got where like a sponsor has got his sponsee dependent upon him. Call me every day. Don't make any decisions and without calling me first. I'll tell you when you can make these decisions. No relationships for the first year. And what that is that's the sponsor putting conditions on whether he will help this person. They'll say, well, you forgot to call me a couple of times and you got into a relationship, you're fired. And what are you doing? You're just fired your sobriety. And those are conditions that people are placing on other people, and they don't understand the idea of, one of the things that I've seen that Bill Wilson writes a lot of is he has to keep reminding himself, because his ego wants to restore itself and say, look at me, I'm the great AA guy, I got all these people I'm helping and all these people I'm like famous in AA, and he has to keep reminding himself how lucky he is to have the opportunity to help others, because it wasn't just a few short weeks, months, years ago, decades with some of us, For me, it's been almost two decades next week. It'll be 2 decades since I had a drink, and I have to keep reminding myself that I am lucky, I'm fortunate to be given this opportunity to help other people. Because, when I was drunk and I said, hey, let me help you with that, people go, get the hell away from me, you drunken bum, But anyway, you can easily see how your ego would keep coming back there. But anyway, I was just getting into that because why does working with another alcoholic save the day? Because remember about the idea of self-sacrifice, giving of yourself freely, the unconditional love that's spoken of. And, I don't know about you guys, but there's not a whole lot of unconditional love in my life. It just isn't. I'm working on it, though. Anyway, many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It was a design for living that works in rough going. And that's the basic idea behind that. Behind helping others is that you don't place conditions on it. And as my sponsor would say, when you do good things, you're going to feel good about who you are on the inside. And when somebody says, hey, buddy, you want to drink alcohol? How you react to that first drink. And that's what we're talking about, building a defense against the first drink, knowing that you can never again safely take one drink without it leading to another debacle. without another drunk, about another, losing everything in jail again. But so our defense comes against the first drink, and that defense comes in the form of how we feel about who we are. That's what my sponsor used to always say. So what was so wrong with the way that you were feeling that you had to turn to alcohol to kill that pain? Anyway, we commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of you see how he's saying that? It's a wonderful thing to feel a part of that, instead of that knot in your stomach when you reach for a drink. I gotta have a drink. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in their lives, in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. I don't know why he says 1,000 right there, because repeatedly in this book it's written. Maybe he was just being optimistic for the future, but in this book it's repeatedly, we are 100 men and women who wrote this book. It's more than once that's actually in there. So he's just being optimistic there when he says thousands. He may have been making a reference to Cleveland, because Cleveland was, he's probably making a reference to Akron, but Cleveland was the group that was largely responsible. Do you want to say something, Bill? Yeah. Thousands of us and our families. That could be, yeah. For each one alcoholic, there's 3 or 4 other people. Yeah. That still only comes to about 500. He was just being optimistic. He's a real optimistic guy, We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. There's an asterisk right there, down at the bottom of the page. In 1988, AA is composed of approximately 73,000 groups. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there's a deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. So that's a pretty profound statement right there, that faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. And what he's making a reference to there is helping others and thinking of others. That is the definition of faith for us in Alcoholics Anonymous. Faith without works is dead, and what we do is we bring others to God. Most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Bill W., co-founder of AA, died January 24th, 1971, right here in Miami, if you didn't know that. They buried him in Connecticut up there, but where did they bury him? He's in Connecticut, or? Pretty sure, yeah. He's not here in Florida, I know that. But he lived here in Miami when he died. Okay, so we're going to go on to There Is a Solution, Chapter 2. And there's a lot of good stuff in here. A lot of first step stuff. A lot of explanation of Alcoholics Anonymous, and so we'll try to get a couple of pages of this under our belt here. So Chapter 2, There Is a Solution, page 17. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. So throughout this book you see the phrase we, and once again I hear people make reference. The reason I'm saying this is, and I'll tell you why, is because in in the chapter how it works, he says no human power could relieve our alcoholism, A, B, and C, and that God could and would have. Well, the idea that no human power could relieve our alcoholism, and the point being that some people come in here and they don't want to give in to the God thing, so they say get people's numbers and get a support group and call people. And, they forget to add in there that when you call these people that they're going to be pointing you towards these spiritual solutions, toward the program of action, to the things that we do in AA. And what they get is they get the whole idea that just like in the rehab or the detox or the halfway house, where it's almost like one alcoholic dependent upon another, almost like, let me see, out in the chapter Working with Others, there's a reference made, maybe it's in Bill's or Dr. Bob's Nightmare, but in one of those chapters there's a reference made that the minute we get these alcoholics dependent upon us, it's in Working with Others, the chapter Working with Others. The minute we get these alcoholics dependent upon us rather than a higher power, then that makes that that it's kind of like one human being dependent upon another human being instead of one human being dependent upon God. And that's the wrong idea, is that, that one human being can be, like I was saying a minute ago, where sponsors will say, hey, you call me with any important decisions, and I tell you what, I got 20 years, and somebody says, hey, they're going to call me with an important decision, and I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to say, look, we'll show you the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, to where we do the inventories, find our fear, find our anger, and find our guilt, and we apply those 3 spiritual solutions of forgiveness when we're angry, faith in God when we're afraid, and amends when we feel guilty for what we've done. Those are the 3 spiritual solutions outlined out there in the 4 through 9 actually. But what happens over the years, I had become sort of, your ego gets bigger, and you want to do what I was just saying. You want other people, you want to give people the answers, and you want to tell them, hey, but that's the wrong thing for both people involved, both me and my ego and them and their dependence upon a higher power. So anyway, that's what the we thing, whenever you say, it's a we program, know that it means we of Alcoholics Anonymous, the first 100 that wrote this book, and that it is not a human being calling another human being other than for the directions on how to get in touch with God. There's sort of a middleman between you and God, not your dependence for sobriety. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that, and all I can say is it's nothing more than people who can't transmit something that they haven't got. And I used to get angry about it, and now I think it's more sad than anything, and I try to put the record straight on something like that. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship of friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers. There's a lot of analogies he gives in here. Like in the 4th step, he gives you an analogy of a person who owns a business. And if that person is to be successful, he must take an inventory of what he has in order to know what's selling and what's not selling. And there's another analogy of a jaywalker who keeps skipping out in front of us to get that high, to get that junkie, to get that adrenaline rush of running in front of these moving trolley cars. And this is one of the ones that I like the best, because this is an analogy of why one alcoholic can get through to another alcoholic like no other can, because we feel connected to one another, whether you want to admit it or not. Alcoholics, when we're either drunk or sober, we feel connected to each other because we don't feel like an outcast, like somebody's been speaking down to us. And anyway, we are like the passengers of a great liner at the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement in which binds us. But that in itself would have never held us together as we are now joined. And now this next paragraph here, subparagraph, I guess you'd call it, it's not a very big one, but this is very profound. one of the most profound statements in the entire book. He says that the tremendous fact for every one of us, and how profound is that? The tremendous fact. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. This is not a different solution for the Wall Street broker, for the doctor in Akron, for anybody at all. The carpenter from here in South Florida, anybody in the United States, men and women. It's not different for women. It's the same spiritual program for women as it is for men. A common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So there's a tremendous fact for every one of us. We have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree upon. And this is the great news this book carries. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness, involved those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt. But not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all those whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be affected. There are many. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist and the doctor. But the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. You know, one of the things I started this transition in my own personal life here. I used to do like everybody else. Someone would say, would you share in a meeting? And I'd speak in that meeting for 30 minutes, and I'd tell everybody about how much I drank, where I grew up, when I was born. I couldn't stand it. I hated it. And one day I heard somebody else do nothing but the steps, so I started sharing nothing but the steps. And I went to my sponsor one day, and I said, hey, how'd I do? My sponsor was at one of the meetings when I was sharing. I did nothing but the steps. I didn't talk about myself or anything. And he said, it's important, just like in Bill's story and Dr. Bob's story and all the stories in the back of the book, if you'll look in there, the first half of the story is it's more like the first 2/3 of the story is drunkalogue, to win, like he says, to win the confidence of these alcoholics so that they know that they're being spoken to by another alcoholic, a real one of us sort of guy, and not some average Joe who's so bored with his life that he got nothing else to do but come and sit and hang out at an AA meeting. But this is a real alcoholic. So that's the importance of, but I still tend to whittle my drunkalogue, if you would, down to some simple stuff like I lied and stole from the people who cared about me the most in my life. And you can imagine what I did to all the other people after that. And I throw a couple of other things in there, like I was on a first-name basis with the booking deputies in the county jail, and that's not to get a laugh. I'm serious. I knew the first names of the deputies that used to book me into the county jail But anyway, the point being that you got to win the confidence of alcoholics too, so that they don't think that they're just being spoken down to by somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're going through, And that's one of the reasons Alcoholics Anonymous is so successful. And one of the reasons why Bill Wilson gave for them breaking away from the Oxford groups when we were part of the Oxford groups, and they kept saying, no, you got to stop focusing on alcoholics, Bill. And Bob, at the time, I think Bob was more of a part of the Oxford groups for almost 2.5 years, and Bill was only there for like 6 months or so with the Oxford groups. But anyway, when they started breaking away after the first couple of years, they sort of, no hard feelings, but, it was definitely anyway. That the man who was making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer. He has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. So that's a pretty good list right there. That holier than thou thing, that there is no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever, except for a sincere desire to be helpful. And I have to tell you, occasionally I have to conjure up my sincere desire to be helpful with a little bit of threat of alcoholism knocking at the back door to get me going. You know, I have to remind myself of. But I'm sure that everybody's like that. I don't think there's probably very few people who don't start to slack off and remind themselves, look, you better get going again, or you're going to end up one of those people who comes in here and going, I don't know what happened. One day I was sober and the next day I was drunk. Okay. These are conditions. Oh, here we go. None of us makes sole vocation of this work, nor do we think its effectiveness would be increased if we did. We feel that the elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our prospective homes, occupations, and affairs. Now, when he says principles there, I've come to know that as my forgiveness, my faith in God, and my amends, because, you know, they've got that whole principles behind the steps things, and that thing is so, it's done more damage to Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe, than just about anything I can think of. Or, you know, anybody breaking their anonymity on the level of press, radio, and films. I know there's a guy out there right now who's in the press. I don't know if you guys have noticed it or not, but he's breaking his anonymity constantly, and it doesn't bother me at all. He did it like yesterday. I was watching it yesterday, and he says, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. These are the 12 steps, and this is what we do. And I'm going, geez, the whole country just saw him break his anonymity on channel whatever it was, 32 or whatever it was. But anyway, when he says the principles lie before us in our respective homes, occupations, and I always see that now as my ability to forgive, because that is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. When you get down into the meat and potatoes, there are really only 3 of these principles that they speak of, and they are faith in God, making amends, and forgiveness when we're angry. And we'll get into that when we get out there into the chapter of how it works, when the meat and the potatoes are the steps, you know, the inventory and the solutions. All of us spend much of our spare time in the sort of effort which we are going to describe. A few are fortunate enough to be so situated that they can give nearly all their time to the work. If we keep on the way we are going, there is little doubt that much good will result, but the surface of the problem would hardly be scratched. Those of us who live in large cities are overcome by the reflection that close by hundreds are dropping into oblivion every day. Many could recover if they had the opportunity we have enjoyed. How then shall we present that which has been so freely given us? You know, one thing, when we read this book, keep in mind, going out to the chapter of Vision for You, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take you out there and show you just for a minute, so you don't think I'm just blowing smoke. We'll go into a Vision for You where I'm going to show you where he's only talking about the idea is that this book is your sponsor. And you're in a faraway city or a faraway land, and there is no one alcoholic working with another. You don't have the opportunity of a sponsor because nobody else. Remember that this book was written in 1939, and in 1939, Alcoholics Anonymous was just getting started, and there was an argument that went on for the writing of the book. One side of the argument was, if we write a book, then it's no longer one alcoholic working with another. But if it's one alcoholic working with another, it's not going to get to Japan or get to Korea or around the world or the Philippines where all the servicemen were, or anywhere else in the, like Russia where they need it. I guess they're still needing it pretty bad over there. It's not going to get around the world for decades. It'll be the 1970s before it even gets to California. So they made the argument that, we're going to write the book. But out in this chapter of Vision for You, on page 163, you see this book is trying to egg you on to go help others. And in the chapter Working with Others, he says you can easily find some people to work with. Just find some doctors, hospitals, sanitariums, priests, ministers, or rabbis, and that these people will be more than glad to help you find some drunks in your neighborhood, in your area that you can help. Okay, so he's trying to give you the idea that if you want to get sober and you have no sponsor, no AA meetings, you just go right out there and find some alcoholics to drink to help. So on the bottom of 162, top of 163, he says, thus we grow, talking about the Alcoholics Anonymous program. Thus we grow, and so can you. Though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. We know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, I'm jittery and alone. No sponsor, no AA program. You with one man with this book in your hand. You know, one of the things that the Comes of Age, I was reading the preface of the book Comes of Age, and it gives you an explanation of what that book is. And what Comes of Age says, I'll bring it up here and read it next week. It says that they give you an explanation of how they came about the 12 steps and how they came about, you know, the idea of recovery. And it's a really good stuff in there, a lot of important. I mean, most people, I know a lot of people come into AA and they go, you know, don't analyze, utilize. I go, what are we, stupid? We can't do both at the same time? Can't chew gum and walk at the same time? Page 20, right in the middle, it is the purpose of this book. That's where we left off last week, I believe. It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. Well, let's go back up a little bit so we will know what he's talking about there. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may be already be asking, what do I have to do? It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done before going into a detailed discussion. It may be well to summarize some points as we see them. So obviously he's fixing to give us some details, and that's one of the things that I didn't know over the years, was that there really are some very detailed. It was years in sobriety before I realized that the details of exactly how to forgive are in here. People made vague passing references to that. Even that stupid thing where they have the principles behind the steps, which isn't AA, forgiveness isn't even on that. It's like they got brotherly love, which I have, what page is that on? I never even seen that in here. Brotherly love or any of that other stuff, but the precise directions on how to forgive are in here. And that's one of the most important things in our lives. So detailed discussion. Before going into detailed discussion, it may be well to summarize some points as we see them. How many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone. Why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine? Lay off of the hard stuff. His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. She's such a sweet girl. I should think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. Now, these are commonplace observations on drinkers, which we hear all the time. Back of them is a world of ignorance and misunderstanding. We see that these expressions refer to people whose reactions are very different from ours. Moderate drinkers have little. So this is where he's going to go into these four types right here. Or is it three? We'll count them as we go through them here. And one of the things that he's fixing to point out right here, and this is one of the things that I point out to my sponsees, is that when you come into Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time and you're looking around the room, and we watch people, see what they're doing. I know I do. I do it. I've been sober 20 years and I still do it. I watch the new people and I watch the old people. I see who's doing what. You know, I want to know who to emulate, who to hang around, who to, you know, hang with, to talk to, or whatever, you know. Who not to be like, you know. So what he's doing here is he's going to give us these types of alcoholics, and he's going to tell us that some of these people, these types that he's saying here, can stop on a non-spiritual basis. They can stop drinking without turning to God for help. And those are the people who, some other people are coming in here and they're saying to themselves, how come I have to work so hard at this? Why can't I do like that guy and just hang out and do nothing, come in late, stroll in, you know, leave early, hit on the women, horse around, go out and smoke cigarettes and answer the phone all day? Why can't I do that? Why do I have to work so hard? Because not everybody in AA is the worst case scenario, and that's what he's fixing to point out right here. Watch. Moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. And remember that the only requirement for membership in AA is a desire to stop drinking. The requirement for membership does not say, oh, you got to be the worst case scenario in which only a spiritual solution will relieve you of that obsession for that first drink. Because we let all those people in here, and we're not going to say, no, you got to go. If you don't need a spiritual solution, you got to hit the door. All we'd have is a desire to stop drinking. They can take it or leave it alone. Then we have a certain type of hard drinker, so we got moderate drinkers and hard drinkers here. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. But what about the real alcoholic? So that's 3 different types he's given us. And I know that there are 4 of them outlined out in the chapter to wives. I'm not sure if the 4 types outlined in the chapter to wives are the real alcoholic and broken down in the real alcoholic into 4 types, or these types that he's given us here as a moderate drinker, a hard drinker, or the real alcoholic. He may start off as a moderate drinker, or he may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Here is the fellow who's been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day, and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. But in that respect he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative. Wait a minute. We're talking about drugs in an AA meeting, aren't we? Wait a minute. I heard that's not the right thing to do around here. This is the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says this. He begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine. This is AA. We can't talk about this. What? So we got to change this book, huh? Doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative with which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. This is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic, as our behavior patterns vary, but this description should identify him roughly. Why does he behave like this? If hundreds of experiences have shown him that one drink means another debacle, with all its attendant suffering and humiliation, why is it he takes that one drink? Why can't he stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower that he still sometimes displays with respect to other matters? Perhaps there will never be a full answer to these questions. You know, that one statement right there has always, I have to tell you, I've studied the idea. I personally, for a couple of years, I had this thought in my head. I said, okay, so the spiritual solution to alcoholism is to get God in your life. Therefore, alcoholism essentially is a lack of God. Therefore, once you get God in your life, how come it is that you still can't drink again? That at no point, no amount of God and spirituality will ever allow you to drink one drink of alcohol without it going. So this is one of the questions that cannot be answered in Alcoholics Anonymous. How come you can get this spiritual solution and you will be immune to that first drink and you will never take an... See, that's all we offer here is a complete abstinence from alcoholism. At no point does anything that no amount of spiritual growth, no amount of connection to God will ever allow you to take one drink of alcohol again. And that is the question that we cannot answer. How come I can't go back to the good old days when I could drink normally? Perhaps there never will be a full answer to these questions. Opinions vary considerably as to why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure why. Once a certain point is reached, little can be done for him. We cannot answer the riddle. We know that while the alcoholic keeps away from a drink, as he may do for months or years, he reacts much like other men. We are equally positive that once he takes any alcohol, whatever, into his system, something happens, both in the bodily and mental sense, which makes it virtually impossible for him to stop. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. These observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink. So that's where our defense comes, is against that first drink. And from what I understand, I struggled with it for a few years, with the idea of going back to the good old days. You know, there was a period in my life when I drank and I enjoyed it, and I had fun, and I could burn a doob with the guys and hang out. And I struggled for a few years to get back to that, and I had to learn for myself that it was over, that it was gone, it wasn't coming back. And that, to me, is what I see when I see people in relapse in AA. The sad thing is that some people that I know have been in relapse for the better part of 10 years, 12. I know this one girl that for 15 years that I know her, she is still out there trying to do it and enjoy one here or there. And that's the only thing I can say, was that I was fortunate enough that it only lasted a couple of years, but some people are out there trying to, you know, they come in for a couple of months, they get sober, and they go, hey, things are going good. I wonder if I can have one again, go back to the good old days. And only defense is against the first one, and as long as you never get the idea in your head that you can take one without it leading to another. I believe that has to do with the first step, is smashing that first step into your head, that you are powerless once you take that first one. And he tells us that these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took that first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc an alcoholic drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of the man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Once in a while he may tell the truth, and the truth, strange to say, is usually that he has no more idea why he took that first drink than you have. Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really do not know why they do it. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. And that's what I was talking about. In hindsight, I look at my own alcoholism, and that's the only thing that I can really relate to you, is my experience with it. And I'd have to tell you that in the back of my head, I really wanted to go back to when I could hang out. I often thought, how am I going to hang out with friends now that I can't drink a beer and smoke a doob or something? What the hell am I going to do? But I later found out that, it's easy. It really is. It's once you want it. I had some friends who said, it was strange. I went straight from the House of Hope to the House of Dope. Man, the guys were dealing weed, and They had parties with 1,000 people passing around LSD in the front yard. I mean, 1,000 people, guys. And the police would direct traffic in and out of these guys' parties. And I was working for them and staying with them, and I didn't have a bit of trouble. I didn't want it, and I was immune. I still am to this day. I have not had an obsession for that drink hit me at all in any way. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. And I felt that for that last couple of years. I thought, I'll be honest with you, what I thought was that I was smarter than everybody else. And because you had a spiritual solution in AA in which you could completely stop drinking, that I was a little smarter than you, and I was going to figure out how to take that spiritual solution to completely stop and work it into this plan I had to go back to when I could control my drinking and I could somehow make this mathematical possibility come to life, and it didn't work. How true this is, few realize. In a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal, but everybody hopefully awaits the day the sufferer will arouse himself from his lethargy, and assert his power of will. The tragic truth is that if a man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point, and the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. And this next paragraph is in italics for a reason. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. And now there's the statement right there that I tell you what, how many times have I sat in a meeting? I've been sober for like 20 years now, and actually 20 years 2 days ago. I sit in meetings, and I'm always hearing people saying, I choose not to drink today. And there's a new person in that meeting who's coming in here to try to figure out how this AA works, and they're trying to amass information. And that's, from my standpoint, that's what I'm always thinking of, the new people. How can we pass on this information to the new people? Because that's your job now. Once you get sober, as a matter of fact, I can find you some stuff in our literature and Comes of Age and in some of the other literature where literally 2 weeks of sobriety and being ahead of the next person behind you is all that's required for you to try to help somebody else. Because helping other people is all we have. And the idea that you have to wait to finish the steps before you start helping others is a falsehood in Alcoholics Anonymous, because helping others is the only thing that's going to keep us sober. And it says that it's the foundation stone of your recovery. It doesn't say it's the end result of your recovery. Helping others is the foundation stone of your recovery. So, that's the message I'm going to try to get to every meeting that I go to from now on. Because, we sit in meetings and we go, how come nobody's making it? Why doesn't anybody get sober? Oh, it's just one of those things. Yeah, it's one of those things when you're not teaching the right stuff out there. And one of the things I was talking about was that people come in here and they go, I choose not to drink today. And that's where that comes in, what I was telling you, that not everybody who's in this room has to have a spiritual solution, has to surrender their life to God, has to completely say to themselves, my only reason from this point on is to serve the God of my understanding, has to see their free will and hold it in their hands and say, thank you, God, for my free will. I want to offer it back to you and ask you, now what do you want me to do? Because that, when we get out to the third step, I'll try to explain some of the details of the steps. But right now we're kind of in step one, if you haven't noticed that or not. There's a whole lot of step one material in here. But the whole idea of the power of choice and drink is, we need to point stuff out like that for the new people so that they understand that there are people in here who can choose not to drink, and it ain't me. I chose not to drink, and I found myself sitting at the bar going, again? How'd I end up? It's like I was sleepwalking or something. Okay, so our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. And when we read on, we're going to find out where the insanity, if you'll remember back to Bill's story, he said, fear sobered me for a bit. I'll tell you what, turn back to Bill's story for just a minute. I'll tell you what page we go into. Bill's step 1 is on page 8. And on page 8, he says, right like the second full paragraph down from the top up there, trembling. Now, this is like Bill's step 1. I got these 2 or 3 paragraphs circled as Bill's step 1. His explanation, his experience as step 1, came to him in his life. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink, and on Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. I believe that this was like his last, or his second to last drunk. But the idea here is that fear can keep us sober for a period of time. The fear of what will happen if I drink. That's why whenever I hear people come in here and say that they had some time in sobriety and then they relapsed, there's one of 2 things that went wrong. Either they weren't staying close to God, or because I tell you, from my own experience, and that's all it is that there was one day in my life I asked God for help, and all of a sudden I felt the presence of God in my life. I felt like there was a reason for everything, and I have not had even the thought of it. I mean, the thought of a drink, yeah, but I've never had that obsession that said, you got to go have a drink, and that's all there is to it. That obsession has not entered me in 20 years, and I am a real alcoholic. I could tell you some stories, but I'd rather not. So what he's saying here is, then came the insidious insanity of that first drink, and that's where we're getting at right now, is where does that insidious insanity come from? What makes me say inside my head, I can have one this time? Knowing that over the years I have fought that first drink, and I have tried to drink one and stop, and I know that it's not happening. I know it's not happening. Yet still, out of nowhere, he calls it the insidious insanity. I can have one somehow. I'm like, where the hell does that come from? And there you are with a beer in your hand. And what's next? Oh, the hell with it. It's over now. We'll try again next time. We are without defense against the first drink, back on 24, and there's a solution. The almost certain consequences that follow taking even a glass of beer do not crowd into the mind to deter us. If these thoughts occur, they are hazy and readily supplanted with the old threadbare idea that this time we shall handle ourselves like other people. There is a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. And that's one of the theories that I've used over the years for the amends of the 9th step. Remember, out in the amends of the 9th step, because the amends are one of our 3 spiritual solutions. We have 3 spiritual solutions that are actually outlined. When he says we go into details in here, we go into the details of how to forgive when we're angry, how to make amends when we've harmed other people, and how to have faith in God to combat our fears, okay? And those are the spiritual solutions of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can show you what page they're on, and we'll read through them. But one of the things I'm getting at here is that when he says here, there is the complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. And, that's just common sense in your brain. Don't put your hand on a hot stove, it's going to burn you. But there's that story out there of the cat on the cold stove. You guys have heard that one, right? The cat's cruising across the counters. He steps on the hot stove, goes flying in the air and tears out. About a week later, he finally gets up the nerve to go across the counter again. He's coming across that counter, and the stove is cold. But the cat remembers that he got burned. He walks around the stove because he's cat on the cold stove theory. And the theory that I'm getting to there is that one of the reasons that we begin to make amends is that we clear away the guilt that we feel for the harms that we had done others. One of the other reasons is, if you'll read those promises of the 9th step, is that we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us, is essentially a statement, and I like to use this statement in the idea that what we do when we practice these spiritual principles in all our affairs is we're teaching ourselves that there's a price to be paid. When he says that there's a lack of defense that one keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove, is if I pay the price for the things that I do, if I hurt somebody and I go up and I fess up and I make my amends and I teach myself that there's a price to be paid when I hurt other people, I am much less likely subconsciously. I mean, because here's the thought: when we're doing that 3rd column in the 4th step, Why am I making a list of what part of my life that it affects? My self-esteem, my ambitions, my personal relations. Why am I making that list? What possible reason could they have for that? Because we're trying to understand that nobody makes a conscious decision to do these things, that you are running on your instincts. Your instincts are telling you do this because you're afraid for yourself, and you have to teach that subconscious instinct within yourself that there's a price to be paid for acting like that. If you continue to think only of yourself and not think of others and think that there's not a price to be paid, you're wrong. The price is alcoholism. So you must teach yourself to have this reaction of putting your hand on a hot stove, only we're using that analogy in how if you go out and harm others. If you think you're going to say something hurtful to somebody, do something, steal, lie, cheat, and be immune to the effects that it's going to have on you, you are wrong. The effects that it's going to have is you will not have this defense against the first drink. We're trying to build a defense against the first drink, and that comes from teaching our subconscious selves to apply these spiritual solutions and to stop being angry, stop being afraid, and stop feeling guilty for harming others. Number one, by not harming others and by forgiving through the process of regular implementation of forgiveness, you will begin to be able to apply that forgiveness subconsciously. You understand that you won't have to sit down and think, okay, let's go over the page again about how to forgive. I ask God for help. I see them as if they too, just like me, are perhaps spiritually sick. I ask God, how can I be of help to the person that I'm angry at? And I go out and I do something to help this person. And those are the process. Something like that is trying to teach me. I'm trying to teach my subconscious self how to react to what does it say? To intuitively know how to handle those situations. Whereas I didn't have a clue. My intuitive way of handling anger was to get in somebody's face, possibly get into a fight, maybe even worry the cops were going to be after me for the next couple of weeks, find a whole new place to hang out and go, you know what I'm talking, I've had people around here do that. I can't go to the bottom line. I got into a fight over there. The cops are looking for me. I haven't had that happen to me in a long time. The alcoholic may say to himself, I'll stop in a minute. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me this time, so here's how. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How often have some of us begun to drink in this nonchalant way, and after the third or fourth pounded on the bar and said to ourselves, for God's sakes, how did that ever get started again? Only to have that thought supplanted by, well, I'll stop with the sixth drink, or what's the use anyhow? When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. So that's one of the things we're trying to burn into our head right here. If you are this third fellow here, this real alcoholic, you have probably placed yourself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. But for the grace of God, there would have been thousands more convincing demonstrations. So many want to stop, but cannot. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, and we're going to begin next week with there is a solution right there. And that's a very good, I got that whole 2 or 3 paragraphs there circled. And now remember, he's saying there is a solution, and he's fixing to tell you what the solution is. And how many times have we read that in a meeting and just go zoom right through there and go, I didn't see a damn thing. I tell you, I read the paragraph that it explains forgiveness, and I must have been like 8 years sober before somebody slowed me down and said, you just read how to forgive. Have you ever tried that in your life? No, I still scream at people when they park in my spot or something, something stupid like that. But that's just an analogy of how stupid some of the things I've gotten into arguments over have been over the years. But anyway, we'll pick up where we left off here, and there's a solution. And as we work our way through here, maybe we'll, go out into some of these latter pages and look up. One of the things I keep referring to is out in the chapter to wives is really the only place in this book that Bill Wilson goes into the 4 types of alcoholics and how to approach each one of those types when you're trying to help them through the sponsorship. Because in the doctor's opinion, that's not Bill Wilson explaining that. That's the doctor explaining when the doctor wrote 5 types, the manic depressive, He's got 5 types in the doctor's opinion, but Bill wrote 4 types out in a chapter to wives. And I've always, why do you hide that out there? Why didn't he put that over here where we really could have used it back and there's a solution or something? Come